Folks, welcome to Toluca Lake. Joined here by. I didn't mean to stop you. You don't. You can keep going. People are loving this.
Just gonna play some blues.
Play some blues. Emil Richards, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, my man.
Yeah.
How are you? No one's asking you to stop, so keep going if you want to keep going.
I'm good.
Emil, can you look at my camera and talk a little bit about the first time that you went on tour with George Harrison and your relationship with George?
George became one of my dearest friends. The year was about 72. Ravi Shankar was a close friend and colleague of mine. We played a lot together. And he actually introduced me to George. And
Ravi did.
yeah.
Wow.
And George and I became really fast friends. This is a picture here that you may want to take a picture of.
Yeah.
I was crocheting hats, and we did a tour
There's George right there.
in 1972, and I made that hat and scarf. I crocheted for everybody in the band, and this was the band. Indian musicians and American musicians. This was the American band. There's Chuck Finley, Tom Scott, Willie Weeks, drummer,
Preston.
Billy
Oh,
Preston.
John Guerin was there?
No, that ain't John. That's a different drummer. Here's Ravi, George, and I'm down here with all the Indian cats. And Robin Ford up here. And these are all the Indian musicians that played with us on that tour.
How did you go in conceptually with that music? In the sense that you were playing somewhat rock, pop, R&B, but also integrating the Indian rhythms as well.
Well, we did two shows each night. Ravi came out first with all the Indian guys, and me and Tom Scott and a couple of guys, Robin Ford,
Yeah.
and we do a whole set of Indian music, and then they'd leave the stage, and we would do the jazz set with all these guys.
With Billy and Chuck?
Yeah.
Wow. Who was George? I mean, let's come back, sit down, but talk about George Harrison. I mean, the lore is there, but who was George Harrison to you, and what did your friendship mean to you?
I loved him. I absolutely loved him. He may not have been the best guitar player in the world, but his love of music and his non-embarrassed attitude toward music was infectious.
What do you mean not embarrassed? You mean there was no snobism kind of thing? I mean, what does that mean?
No, it was like he was around a lot of good musicians on that tour, and he didn't care. He didn't care who heard him play, or he just played, man. He just wanted to play all the time, and I don't know how to say it, but he wasn't embarrassed to play anything in front of everybody, you know? I mean, he was there to also learn. And he was more than just a Beatle. And there was no snobism about his playing, or he was humble. He was a humble player. And he impressed the heck out of me. I mean, he wasn't afraid to play with all the heavy cats, you know what I mean?
Right.
Just, I don't know how to say it, but the one thing that impressed me the most about him was he was never without his guitar. He'd have that guitar and play with it all the time.
He was just always searching.
Oh yeah.
I mean, can you talk, like, did you knew Alo Rocca? Did you?
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about your relationship with Alo Rocca?
We had a private plane that we traveled all over the U.S. with. And Robbie, Alla was my plane seat buddy.
He was and so I know that you guys were trading rhythms with each other all the time.
That was what I'm just going to talk to you about. I had all the barf bags from the airplane, and I was writing all the rhythms that Alla would recite. And I'd say, Alla, just do that one again. I didn't catch the end part. And Chuck Finley is asleep behind us, and he said, I got that one, just have him go on to the next one. I said, Chuck, you're kidding. I mean, Chuck, being a trumpet player, not a percussionist or anything,
right,
had everything that Olive did down without even writing it down. He was, like I said, he was asleep, but Olive kept waking him up because of all the fantastic stuff he was saying.
Was he an autodidact? I mean, he just was able to hear it and know it?
Right. Chuck was a fantastic musician.
How did the raga and the polyrhythms influence your playing? And is there a way for you to demonstrate a raga on the vibes?
No, not right offhand.
How did that polyrhythmic stuff, though? You were already doing it before you met them, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you already were doing the microtonal. Can you play some microtonal music on the vibes for people?
No, because microtonal meant intervals smaller than half tones. This instrument has half tones. And
so that was
microtonal instruments were smaller than that. And I met that gentleman there, that painting of
Harry Partch.
Harry Partch.
My man, dude.
Right.
Dude, he's with me on this journey, man.
And he had 43 tones to the octave.
It's a 42-tone octave or
43? It was actually 40 with 3 auxiliary tones. And our scale has 12. Harry had 43. And that was my beginning of learning about microtonal music. And I met Harry 12 years before he passed and became a disciple of his immediately. I mean, he was my main man as far as learning about microtonal music, and that preceded Ravi Shankar for me and all of that. I mean, Harry was the one that opened it all up for me.
When did you first record with Harry? I have some albums with you on there, but I know that he was up in Sausalito doing stuff too. He was doing stuff, plectra and percussion it was called. And Vince Delgado was on that.
Yeah, he lived in Petaluma.
Yes, with the beat poets and those cats.
Yeah, and I didn't know him then. I met him
when he moved down here.
Down to Sausalito. I actually paid for his move to L.A.
Wow, really?
Yeah. I paid for the move of all the instruments.
That's funny. Just for the audience, can you talk about a couple of instruments that he actually built himself?
He built all his instruments. All the instruments that were in his ensemble were his. He built them all. He had a diamond-shaped marimba, like 1 bar, 2 bars, 3 bars, 4 bars, 5 bars, 6 bars, 7 bars, 6 bars, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that when you slid or glissed this way or this way, you got these U-tonalities or O-tonalities in chords that were incredible. All I can tell you is every day coming home after a rehearsal with Harry and his instruments, you could hear every sound, every carve that went by, everything was music. I mean, it just opened up my ears anyway to everything around me, it became music because of hearing all those microtones all day at the studio. He was the guy. He was the main man for microtones, and so after that, working with Ravi Shankar was nothing really. I mean,
Was Partch. I mean, he was obviously not East Indian descent, but was he the first polyrhythmic cat in Western culture? Because I mean, Harrison. The reason I bring up Harrison is that how humble the cat was. That here he is, a rock star. He could have totally been insulated, and all those guys chose, mainly Harrison. They chose to bring Indian musicians over here, right? So that was the first. A lot of people consider it the pop level. That was the first introduction of Indian music here. But Partch was actually ahead of that.
Oh yeah, and so was, you mentioned Harrison. Lou Harrison was a microtonal kind of classical musician who was a friend of Partch, and so was John Cage. They were friends of Partch. They kind of grew up together, those three guys, and but Harry just took it a few steps
Way up, like
way
100 steps.
way up.
Okay, I'm going to ask you this. A lot of people are asking for you to play. There was we talked about this album off air, Spirit Feel with Kellaway. Kellaway did a tune that you wrote called Blues for Hari Krishna. Can you?
No, it wasn't Hari Krishna. It was Hari Har Rao.
Who is okay? It wasn't Hari Krishna, but who is Hari Har Rao?
He's in that picture with us playing with Ravi Shankar and the jazz players. He came on tour with us. He was a disciple of Ravi's. So we all really learned first about Indian music. Before I met Ravi Shankar, I met Hari Har Rao, who was playing here with us. We had a group called the Microtonal Blues Band. And
what year?
Oh,
62?
at least that, yeah.
Blues for Hari. Can we hear at least the melody? Can we hear a little bit of that? I mean, this is what it's about.
Without the rhythms, it doesn't make too much.
Without the rhythms, it's hard. It swings. That tune swings. Now you're not on that album, but that I was like, did he write a tune for Hari Krishna? But no, it's Hari.
Blues for Hari.
Hari, and he was the
Rao. His last name was R-A-O. Rao.
Rao, and he was an East Indian cat.
Yeah.
And he was here way before Ravi ever came here.
Well, he's the one who was teaching students here, and we all studied with him before he was our first introduction to Indian rhythms.
That is absolutely mind blowing for me. So that was after you had moved from New Haven. You were clearly established here.
Yeah, Hartford. I was from Hartford.
Were you building your own instruments before you met Partch?
Kind of, but Partch really opened it up for me. In fact, I sponsored a couple of instruments that Partch made by giving him the finances to build the instruments. One was these beautiful bells that when I started traveling around the world, I started collecting these bells that I found. They would be like 7, 5, 4, never 4, 7, 5, 3 inside each other. And they were all tuned microtonally. And I took the whole conglomerate of those that I collected, and I put them in ascending and descending order, and just had a beautiful instrument with those. And Harry loved that instrument, so he put gourds on them as resonators. He found the same pitch in a gourd as the resonator for each one of those, which he called Dharma bells.
Dharma bells, man. I love it, man. Can you talk about the psychedelic experiences and that you've had, and how ultimately the expansion of consciousness for you led to invention and more than anything else, sonic expansion?
Well, for me, it wasn't psychedelic. I mean, I didn't approach any of the LSDs and all that as
a gateway to music.
Yes.
Right.
It had nothing to do with music for me. It just.
But you were tripping out.
Oh yeah, along with everybody else. But in some ways, it was a hindrance.
In what way? Why would you say that?
Well, because there was a thing called bad trip.
There still is a bad. Yeah, absolutely. It hasn't gone away, man.
Yeah.
I've had a few.
Yeah. Well, then you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, then they can be permanent too in some way.
Yes, and they weren't educational in any way for me. I mean, it was a hindrance. It got in the way of, at least for music, it didn't enhance anything I was learning musically. I don't think. It might have appeared to have stretched my ears out some, but in reality, it was a hindrance. It got in the way of my being serious about music.
I did. We're talking to Emil Richards. Keep the comments coming, and people are absolutely on fire and loving this. It's interesting. You grew up in New Haven, Hartford. Your mom had the first liquor license there.
Yeah.
You played with Eddie Marshall. You played with Toshiko, going back to when you were in the army band in Japan. And cats like Julian Priester, when they moved to New York, it was like this burning bebop scene. They thought that was the real shit, and that's fine. But whatever was going on the West Coast was looked at as cool jazz. Well, why did you decide to leave for California? I mean, it was about. Was it more? Was there more freedom to experiment out here as opposed to the strict adherence to bop that was going on the East Coast?
Well, I had been on the road for 3 years with George Shearing when it was time to leave, and we traveled 60 how many weeks in a year?
52.
52. All right, then we traveled 50 weeks a year.
That's a Stan Getz kind of thing with Jack Teagarden. You were on the road every day.
Yes.
Every day.
Back and forth. We'd go from coast to coast maybe 6 or 8 times a year.
There's a lot of bread.
Yeah, but a lot of traveling and a lot of work. What was your question?
I remember reading the liner notes off Journey to Bliss, and there was this adherence to the visceral, emotive cry of bebop on the East Coast versus the ability on the West Coast when you came out here to build your own instruments and create new scales. Partch played a role in that, the Microtonal Blues Band. But what was your impetus to move? Why did you decide to move to California? Was there more freedom, and not such an adherence to the bebop language?
I was, like I say, on the road with George Shearing's group for 3 years, and I decided that I was going to get off the road. And I had two places to go, either Los Angeles, the Hollywood scene, or stay in New York. And I had been coming out to LA while on the road with George Shearing and recording a lot with him. And Billy May was very important in that he was doing all the writing for the George Shearing Quintet. We did burnished brass. We did all strings on one album, all brass on another. And anyway, I got to be real tight with Billy. And I said, Billy, I'm thinking of leaving the road. He was in New York. We were working at the Embers Club in New York. I said, I'm thinking of leaving the road, and I can't make up my mind whether to stay in New York or move to L.A. And Billy said, well, when I decided to leave the road, because Billy was a trumpet player, and he had his own band on the road for years. And he said, when I decided to leave the road, I said, where do I stay? Do I stay in New York or do I move to L.A.? And he said, I picked L.A. because the weather was better. And, that was my reason. I said, that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
So that was really my impetus for getting off the road. And I've never regretted a day that I've been out here, because all the people I met and learned from is still kind of happening in a way,
Did you know, I forget the name of the music store, but at a certain point in Pasadena, Gary Foster was teaching clarinet, David Finley was teaching banjo, and Keltner was teaching snare drum. Did you play jazz with Keltner?
Yeah.
With Stinson?
With what?
With Albert Stinson?
No.
Like in what capacities? Because to me, this is where the rubber meets the road with the Jake Feinberg show. Because Keltner obviously became, as you did, entrenched in the studio scene, but you were part of the Wrecking Crew. I mean, you were part of that. You played jazz with Keltner, and just I wanted you to talk about that whole experience.
Well, actually, I didn't play that much jazz with Keltner. In fact, I knew him for a long time and never knew that he played jazz.
Because he played with Claire Fisher on records, and
Yes.
but you never even knew that he even played.
I didn't know.
He was obsessed with it.
That.
Yeah, he was obsessed with Philly Joe Jones.
I never knew that about Jim until I went out and heard him play with some guys and freaked out that he could do that as well, and very, very well. I mean. But I have to say, in all the years that we hung out together, my closest experience with Jim was with George Harrison.
No, I didn't see him in that pick. Did he go on that tour?
Yes, he did.
So he was double drums, double
Yes,
trap set on that?
They had double drums. And what happened was George asked Jim to come on tour with us on that tour. And Jim said, I'm sorry, George. I just been on the road too much. I got to stay home. My kids are young. They're missing their dad, and my wife would like me to stay home too. And George said, let's take the kids on the road. We'll get a private tutor. This
is great.
Well, I made too much money this year, and he says, I won't give you money. I'll buy you a car. I'll give you a Rolls Royce. What do you want? You make your terms, and I'll do it. I just want you with us, And I didn't know any of that either at the time. But Jim showed up on the tour, and his children came every once in a while, and his wife. And that's how we really got tight.
And those when like Chuck Finley's just tuning in, but like when you guys you'd play the Indian set, the raga, then you play jazz. That's when you played jazz with Keltner,
Right?
Right? You were playing double drums.
Yeah, that was Andy Newmark.
Andy Newmark, is he still with us?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I really hope Andy.
He stayed in the East Coast, and I really lost touch with anything about him.
Could we bring Richard Waters is a brilliant cat, part of the Gravity Adjusters expansion band up in the Bay Area, and he invented the waterphone. And when I interviewed him before he passed, he said when Shelly Manne started to fall in love with the waterphone, he bought some, and you bought some, and you have a couple here.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could demonstrate that for what the waterphone is.
This is one waterphone, and he put it together with a stainless steel mixing bowl. And he put two of them together, he soldered them together, and these are brass brazing rods. Now there's two sounds we're not hearing. One is if you put a little bit of water in this is just a piece of exhaust from a car, I think. You put a little water in there, and the tone, it wobbles around some. But then, by using a bow, you get some other nice sounds. And being a percussionist, I just collected, I think 700. My last catalog was with 700 instruments that I had collected and put into that catalog. Like I say, I've sold my whole collection now.
This is shocking news that we'll get into later. How would you use that in soundtracks when it first came out? What was so scintillating about it for you with like E.T. and those kinds of... How would it stretch the music out?
It just had that spooky ambient sound that composers fell in love with, and they all wanted to use it.
Were you able to solo with the bow on that thing?
Well, not really solo, but it became a part of the rest of the orchestra. It never was featured just by itself, but with 100-piece orchestras, it really played a really strong role.
You play that bow one more time on there?
If you can imagine the water inside.
That's what I mean. We got to get it. We got to get to a sink, man. Because that water. I've heard it with the water, and it's so spacey and tripped out. I love the sound with the water in it. Rest in peace, Richard Waters.
Yes, man.
You know, but when he came down here, how many of those did you buy? Did you actually buy?
Probably close to a dozen of them. Some I gave to my colleagues, and some I don't remember what happened to them all. I only have 2 left, though.
Oh, man, I mean that. This is unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, Emil, I wanted to ask you about Bags. Was Milt Jackson your hero?
Yes, but I'm a little older than Milt, and I grew up in the Lionel Hampton days. So the two guys that impressed me growing up were Lionel Hampton and Red Norvo. Those were the two vibe players that I aspired to be like because they were the ones I heard the most.
That's interesting. Bags. You did. I know Bags grew up in Yonkers, though. He was an East Coast cat.
Yes, but when I first heard Milt, he had the funkiest sounding vibes in the world. I don't know where he got them, but
for my generation, funk is actually like a part of the lexicon of music. But you're talking about just the tone that he got off the wood was funky.
Not off the wood, off the metal.
Metal.
Because he played vibraphone, which are metal bars, not wooden bars. So he just had a funky old instrument when he first started out. And he sure made it sound great, but the sound of the instrument itself was pretty bad. And like I say, I grew up with Hamp. Hamp was my gramp.
Hamp was your grand. He was a showman too, and he could really play. How did you deal with the early PA systems too? I mean, nowadays you have these monster, sound systems at concerts, and it blows out to the whole audience. With Elvis and early rock and especially jazz, you might only have one mic, or you're playing off the PA. How were you able to get the vibes to actually project out into the crowd with those sort of antiquated PA systems?
Well, we always used two microphones to pick up a better sound off of the vibe. But in the very early days, a couple of guys came up with, this is the nodal point of an instrument. You can hit on the end or in the middle, you got the best sound.
Right.
If you played right on the where the string goes through, that's the dead part of a bar. If you were to hold any bar up and hit it, if you hold it by the nodal point, which is approximately 1/5 of the bar's length, that's the dead spot on both ends. And that's where the bars of wood or metal are suspended. And that's the dead spot. And that's the only place to really suspend a musical bar. So a couple of guys really early on came up with putting a pickup under each bar so that the vibraphone was getting a clear sound on every bar separately.
Who were those cats? Hamp was doing that, or who put the pickups on?
I never found out the name of the guys.
But you just heard it.
You
did it yourself.
I did it. I went out and bought the pickups and put them on the instrument myself to begin with, and then later the vibraphone companies put the pickups on the instruments. So that's how that came about.
So but that was the precursor. So in general, though, like with McKibben and I can't remember the drummer's name again, but with
Percy Bryce.
With Bryce, how did you work to get the vibes into the? Was it just that the music was quieter and the vibes were able to carry more? I mean, today, to me, it's a lot. To me, it's a travesty because it's an instrument that you don't see in live melodic music anymore a lot. at the time it was extremely popular, and I just wonder if that was because in general, the music in general was quieter.
No, because we needed to be louder with the orchestras too. So, like I say, we had at least 2 microphones above the instrument. You can't put them underneath because the resonators that also have sound, by the way. You can hear sound coming out of the resonators so that they are tuned to correspond with the bar. So they're tuned like the bar itself. And that helps project more sound out of the instrument. And having 2 microphones picked up the instrument in its entirety. But then the pickups really did help a lot.
They did help quite a bit.
Yeah.
Boy, people are on fire. They are loving this. With the Flintstones stuff, I mean, how did you learn to sight read off flypaper? I mean, the idea they'd be like, yo, throw this stuff, you know, like this is a scene where Fred's going to fall down, or, you know, people like David Kemper were always in awe when they were doing, when they were engineering, of just the idea that you could do it in one take. And how did you learn to do that on the fly in an improv setting and make it so that when you heard it, it really was sounding like Fred falling down the stairs?
The composers were really I admired the early composers. I played a lot of cartoons, and I have to tell you that the most difficult music to play is cartoon music.
Why?
Well, because like you said, falling down the stairs, you're getting something like, and that's written out. That's not.
Yes, that's written out.
That's all written out, and it enhanced my sight reading enormously to play cartoons. And the xylophone, which is like a marimba, only starting up higher with hard rubber mallets and playing even another octave or 2 above the marimba range. It had that sound of comedy. Is that a word for to be comic sounding? You know.
We're making up vernacular. We're making up verbiage on this interview, but I dig it. Yeah, it brought out the humor.
Yeah, the humor, and the xylophone was one instrument that really enhanced that. Consequently, it was used a lot in cartoon music, and I'm very fortunate to say playing all of that music helped my sight reading tremendously.
We got people coming in and saying comedic.
Right.
People are on fire. They are loving this. Your experience with Zappa, what tune did you play on with him?
I played his first album, Lumpy Gravy.
What you played? You played the marimba or?
Played marimba, xylophone, vibraphone, all the melodic instruments.
What was Frank like at that time? That was his first album. He was not yet the star that he became.
Let me just say this. That was his first album. We walked in, and everybody kind of made fun of him with his mustache and goatee and
the soul patch he had there. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything he was playing. The Lumpy Gravy took bassoons and bass clarinets, well, just the whole orchestra of instruments, and there were 2 or 3 symphonic musicians playing bassoons and bass clarinets and they looked at the music and said, "Oh, that's unplayable." And everybody was kind of making fun of Frank, you know. And he said, if I take my instrument, if I take my guitar and play those passages, will you at least try to play it? No, impossible. It's unplayable. So Frank says, okay, let me play that passage that I had written for you. And Frank played it, and Tommy Tedesco was the guitar player that played with us a lot. And he was a monster. He could play anything. And he said, hey guys, stop fooling with this guy. He knows what he's talking about. And we all said that. And we were in awe of his musicianship, with everything about him from the beginning. That was the first album, the first days that we saw Frank and knew him. And I got to tell you, Vinny Colaiuta ended up being one of his main drummers. Although Terry Bozzio
was there. Billy Mundy, yeah.
He had many, many great drummers.
Humphreys.
Yes, Ralph Humphrey. But we just learned, I learned from the very beginning to respect him. And
Tedesco, those bassoon cats, the classical cat, they were more locked in, and they said, "This is not. There's no way we can play this."
correct.
They actually really believed there was no way to play it.
Right.
Okay. They weren't jiving him, and then when he played it on the guitar, he said,
they humbled themselves enough to say, "Let's try it."
My battery is getting lower. I would like people. Could you just play a blues for Christmas? Some improvisational thing for the peeps. This has been an absolutely cosmic interview, Emil, and we'll do some more. But I got to recharge my phone. But just
I got to just say one thing.
Do it
about Zappa.
Yeah.
I lost the train of thought there for a minute.
He was a pioneer.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a piece that Zappa played with, who was the first drummer we mentioned?
Bozzio or Vinny was his. Okay, yeah, Vinny Colaiuta.
He wasn't his first drummer.
Yeah, Vinny Colaiuta. Yeah.
He was the first one I mentioned about him.
Sure.
All right. Vinny played a piece that was this thick on paper. Like a book.
Yeah.
And I was at Frank's house one day, and he played this thing with just drums and guitar. And as he's playing it, he comes out with this music, and he says, start here. And I'm following it, reading along with what was written. I said, Frank, you mean you guys read this? He says, oh no. He says, we played it improv, but later on, Vinny transcribed the whole thing and made a book out of it. I said, you're kidding. That's impossible. I ran into Vinny about a month later. I said, Vinny, that thing you did with Frank, drums and guitar, it's insane, man. How the heck did you ever put that on paper? And Vinny says, put that on paper? I never put that on paper. I says, you're kidding. It was just you and Frank, and he said you put it on paper. He says, I didn't put it on paper. He put it on paper. He never wanted to take credit for things like that he did. He always fluffed off that he was great. He was so great at music in every respect that, can you imagine he wouldn't even take credit for it?
Well, I just can't imagine someone from my generation not taking credit for that.
Yeah.
That to me is astounding.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that say to you about the saliency of the ego and the humbleness of, I mean, he obviously you're older than Frank, but I mean, and I am not a Frank Zappa aficionado, but that's profound.
Yes.
To just basically say, oh yeah, Vinny did it. You know, I don't want the credit. I mean, maybe at a certain point you just realized that a lot of these cats understood that they were just human beings like everybody else, and they were tired of being treated like gods. So maybe it was just easier to deflect that stuff off.
I don't know.
But the guy was a super genius, and I love the story about Lumpy. I love the bassoonists getting them out of that classical rut, and basically saying, "Hey, you know, you can. If I can play it on my guitar, you can do it on the bassoon."
Yeah.
Can you leave us with a blues for Christmas? Emil Richards. My man, much love to you, man. And Emil, so good to see you, and we'll do it again real soon. And this is the Jake Feinberg Show, live from Toluca Lake. Any final words, any words of wisdom as we move into totally unknown historical times? You've been on this earth for a long time, a lot longer than most of us. What's your words of wisdom as we move into the new calendar year?
I'd like to see music continue to develop and not run stagnant like some of the political people that are around right now. It just needs a little attention it's important that music continues to grow and be appreciated and not get stagnant.
Just to follow on that, what about the idea of a musician being treated as a profession and not, because we're in a very quantitative time now where everything's data analyzed, there's all crunch numbers. As you know, music is unquantifiable. Now you have these situations where people say, oh, you can pay to play or you can play for the door. What about the idea of a musician as a profession? You grew up in the gravy years of that, okay? But that doesn't exist anymore.
I thought it did. I spend most of my day with 100 or 200 musicians at a time that I deal with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that'll continue and expand even more so. That's what I would look forward to in the future.
We'll do it again. Emil Richards, a legend. Love always, man. Happy New Year.
Yeah, same to you, man.